Hi everyone and welcome back to Chess for Charity. In this video, I'm going to show you an amazing study that looks very simple on the surface, but contains some crazy complexity. So it's just a white pawn and a white bishop, and of course the kings, and your job is to see if you can get this h-pawn to h8 without the king stopping you, right? So let's just quickly talk about the study in general. I do not know who the composer is, or else I would have credited them in the video, but it looks like a pretty simple position, so maybe it's not composed by somebody, who knows. So before I show the solution, just take a second to think about this. Look at the king, look at the bishop, look at everything, the king and the pawn, of course, and the black king. It's white to move, and just see if you can figure out the general idea. Maybe spend, 30 seconds to see how far you can calculate. And when you're done with that, I'd encourage you to return. Okay, while you're doing that, let me quickly just mention that I've crossed 4,000 subscribers, so thank you for that. For those of you who have subscribed, I really appreciate it. If you continue to subscribe, we keep helping charity, so it all is great. So let's look at all of these bishop moves as part of the solution. And of course, the king has many moves as well. And let's just talk about all of them. So immediately, you should realize that if it were black's move right now, they would play a very simple move. They'd play king g1, and they'd take this pawn next, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? So, and that would be a draw, right? A king and a bishop versus a king is a draw. So any king move is ruled out, because any king move would result in king g1 taking the pawn, right? So let's just get that clear. Now let's talk about all of these bishop moves. And in general, we should talk about what is black's plan if it were black's move, right? I mentioned that king g1, great. But in a more abstract way, what is black trying to accomplish? And the answer to that, if you know your endgames, is they want to run to the corner. If they can get to h8, they draw. Why is that? Because I have a bishop that's a light squared bishop, and h8 is a dark square. So I would never be able to dislodge the black king from h8. That's the basic idea. You're probably familiar with the idea, but just want to mention it to make sure I'm at all levels here. So what do you do as white? Well, it's the goal. Let's look at all the squares. And let's just start with, we'll just start from the bottom here. Let's say bishop f1. So you don't take the bishop, because if black takes the bishop, you just run, and you're not in the square, and they win. So you don't do that. Instead, if bishop f1, you play the very calm move. You just play king e3. King f3 is probably fine too. Just the idea, like I was saying, just on the dark squares is the way I'm thinking, because they can't touch me in the dark squares. And you just run to h8. You want to try to push the pawn? That's okay. I just play something like king f4. And even if you try to block me off at some point, I have this move. And you want to hold on to your pawn? That's fine. My goal is to get in the corner. I don't really care about your pawn. Of course I do, but I think you know what I mean. I'm trying to get to the corner. If I can get to the corner, your pawn does not matter. So this will be a draw, right? So, okay, king e3 is the move. Is it different if I play something like bishop g2? Well, can black get away with taking it? Again, no. Because if they take, this pawn moves 2 on its first turn, which means you're not going to be able to catch me, and white will win. Okay, so any of these bishop moves we can rule out. Let's put those in red. So now we're left with these, what would that be, 5 squares? And let's just, we can start from the top, we can start from the bottom. Let's go g4. If I play bishop g4, it looks like a good idea, right? I'm blocking this square with my pawn, I'm blocking this square with my bishop, and I'm forcing the king to go to e3 if it wants to run around. Sure. But after I play this, I don't really have a way to keep the king out of this square, and then subsequently this square, and go up the board. So I play something like h4. Yeah, it's important to note that something like king e4 would not win, because if I play something like h5, I'm creating a little barrier here, and that's going to cause them to go outside of this chain. So like this. And this is the beautiful move right here that wins it. Bishop h5, and the king is cut off, right? That's the idea. So what I'm saying there is in that position, you can't play king e4. Instead, you have to play king f4. Like I said before, stay on the dark squares. They can't mess with you there. And nothing really you can do here. You can try to move the bishop back, try to create this little barricade, but I just keep going on the dark squares and I'm going to be fine. Right? You want to push the pawn, that's okay. Right? Even if you think you're going to get there first, you're guarding this, that's okay. I'm here, I'm going to take this next, right, as black. So just to get a sense of what's happening there. So there are ways to go wrong as black, but if you're with best play here, these three squares are now ruled out. Okay, is it any different with bishop f5? And you might start to notice a theme here. So I'm going through these one at a time, but hopefully you see the more abstract point. So again, the king wants to run on the dark squares, and oops, not there, to the corner to prevent the pawn. Right? I want to see at what point do you notice the pattern. So if you're sick of this, just keep thinking about where am I going to go wrong here? What's the difference between these squares? Try to identify that ahead of time. See if you can beat the video. Okay, well, king e3. Okay, I play h4. I could play something else, but it doesn't matter because king f4. And now what are you going to do? If I take this bishop, I'll have an easy route. If you move the bishop, maybe you go somewhere like, I don't know, here, bishop d7. That's fine. I'm going to the dark squares. And you can't, again, you can't prevent me from doing that. And there's no fancy move. Something like this, it cuts off these squares, but notice that the bishop and the pawn are actually working on the same squares, which means black can just slip right through to g7, and they're going to draw this game. Okay, let's keep going then. What about bishop e6? You might think that's a good distance away. What's wrong with this? Same idea. King e3. I'm going to run the dark squares up, and what's the problem with that? But here, like before, it is easy for it's easy for black to go wrong and for white to win this game. Just to give you a sense, and I think you might start to see the pattern here. If in this position, they stay on the dark squares and they play king f4, look at the coordination between this pawn and this bishop. Okay, what about that? White has one really good move here. Well, I should say one move that wins. The rest of them draw. Take a second to see if you can find that move, and maybe you'll start to see the bigger theme. The move in this position is the very simple king d4. What does that move do? Look at this barrier that I'm building around black's king. They're now forced, well, they're forced to one of these two. They're not forced to one. They're forced backward, either f3 or g3. In either case, this pawn has wheels, and it's going to go up the board. It's going to run, run, run. So it is easy to go wrong here. Okay, so you don't go to f4. Instead, you go to e4, because now such a king move doesn't work because I'm still on these dark squares, right? I hope you see that point that I'm making here. You just go king e5, and now there's no more strong blockade, if you want to call it that, because I'm just running up the board, right? Okay, so we're getting somewhere here. Okay, so without giving away the answer is d7, so I guess I'm giving it away. Let's quickly look at why c8 does not work. So it's for a very similar reason. King e3. Okay, h4. What are you going to do to stop me? Well, you have to play king e4 because you don't want my king blocking off and creating this barrier like I showed a minute ago. So you play king e4. And here, like before, black is able to run right through and slip the defense. So there's nothing that really they can do as white. White cannot do anything here. This is going to be a draw. So king e5, again, we can just show this all the way out if you want. And feel free to mess with the different variations. I'm showing just when they push the pawn. It's going to be a draw in all cases. So just go through that if you want more comprehensive stuff. Okay, that leads us to the solution, which is bishop d7. Awesome. So if you found that, amazing job. The question is, why is this different? What is different about this move and this square in particular than the other squares? Well, let's talk about it. So king e3, right? Same idea as before. I'm going to try to run this king up the board, either through this path or through this path, and hopefully go to the corner. Okay, h4. Only move, by the way, that wins. Important note there. So let's ask this question. Before, I was showing that king f4 failed because of this king d4 counter, and we're creating a little barrier, and that forced the king back, right? I showed that a minute ago in a very similar position. But in that position, I showed that king e4 actually was the winning, or the way to draw as black. So in this position, what's the difference? If I play king e4 now, I can play, sorry, I'm saying if black plays king e4 now, white plays h5, only winning move. And now this same idea, the same concept applies pretty much a rank higher. Now we're going to be on the 5th rank. So, okay, let's just say king e5. Again, the goal is to run here. Okay, now what is the catch? What's the difference? I play h6. What is the difference here? King f6. And here is the difference. Here is why d7 is different from all these other squares, including these two. I now have access to the wonderful e8 square. And what does that do? That creates a barrier. So now the black king is forced to go back. You can pick your favorite square to retreat to, and I'm going to go h7, h8 equals queen. I'm going to win this game, no problem. I don't even need the bishop anymore. So that's it. That's how you win. Something like this is just a perfect example of it. No stalemates. Don't worry. I'm not going to do this to you and make you watch me checkmate with the king, a bishop, and a queen. But that's the critical difference. So just to make sure it's clear, every other square doesn't give me this important e8 pivot square. If you want to call this d7 square a pivot square, because I'm using it as one point to pivot to the next point, and that's going to create the synergy. The synergy is just when two things combine to form a strong relationship. The pawn and the bishop form that nice relationship. So that is it. That's pretty much how you do it. Black could play other things. If you want to look at other variations, you can, but any other one doesn't really make sense, I don't think. If you go here, it doesn't really matter. I just play this move. I'm blocking off, and no matter what they do, I will be okay. h6, and again, they want to chase me. h7, you want to chase me again? I'm going to get there before you get there. So that is it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you got something out of it. Yeah, I thought it was instructive. It's a really amazing puzzle. If you did, like the video, subscribe, all that stuff helps me out tremendously, and I'm incredibly grateful for everybody who does it. But that is it for now. Thank you so much. Bye.